Some patterns are easy to miss until you start connecting the dots. Hello and welcome back to Rooted in the Seasons, where ancient wisdom meets modern life with a strong cup of tea and practical tools for real busy women. I'm Katya Patel, Ayurvedic diet and lifestyle educator, yoga teacher, and teacher mentor. I've been interested in philosophy for as long as I can remember. Questions about life and death, why we are here, what makes us who we are, and what lies beyond what we can see have always fascinated me. When I was introduced to the yoga philosophy, those questions took another dimension. Yoga showed me that philosophy can be deeply practical. These ancient teachings have something to say about how we live, how to respond to difficulties, how we understand ourselves, and how we move through everyday life. Today, I want to look at one part of the yoga philosophy that might not seem particularly practical at first glance, the subtle body. We are going to explore Prana, the vayus, Nadis, koshas, chakras, and Kundalini. And more importantly, how they all relate to each other. Because once you start the pieces, they give us a surprisingly useful map for understanding ourselves. And I'm going to build a map with you as we go. You don't need to remember every Sanskrit word. Just follow the pieces as we add them one by one. By the end, I hope you'll see why something that can sound quite abstract can actually help us become clearer about what is happening within us. Why do we need a more detailed map anyway? Take something very ordinary. You're tired. But what does tired actually mean? Your physical body might be tired. Perhaps you've exercised, you've been on your feet all day, or you haven't slept enough. Your mind might be tired after hours of concentrating, organizing, thinking, making decisions. Your energy can feel depleted. Or you might feel emotionally exhausted after a difficult meeting or conversation. Those experiences can all end with us saying exactly the same thing: I am tired. And quite often, our default response is the same too. We lie down. Sometimes that's exactly what the body needs. But perhaps you know that experience of lying down because you're exhausted, while your mind simply carries on. You're physically still, but the thinking, planning, and replaying hasn't stopped at all. So the part of you that needed attention wasn't necessarily the physical body, but your mind might need a completely different activity. Your energy might need food or movement. You might need to go outside, breathe differently, talk to somebody, or have enough quiet to recognize what you're actually feeling. This is where having a more detailed map of ourselves becomes useful. The clearer we become about what we are experiencing, the more specifically we can respond. And that brings us to the first part of our map. Prana, our life energy, our life force, our life spark. Without prana, there is no life. We take prana in different ways. Through the breath, most importantly. Through food, and through what we receive from the world around us, including light. If you practice yoga, you probably recognize the word from pranayama, the breathing practices of yoga. Once prana is within the body, it needs to do things. And yoga describes 5 main movements or functions of prana, known as the 5 prana vayus. I find it much easier to think of them as 5 jobs that prana has to do in the body. So let's go through them. And remember, you don't need to memorize the Sanskrit names. Pranavayu is the first, slightly confusing because it's called pranavayu. So we have prana, our overall life energy, and then one of its 5 functions is also called pranavayu. Pranavayu has the inward movement. It is centered mainly around the chest and head, and is closely connected to the in-breath. And that makes sense. We can survive for quite some time without food. We can survive for some time without water, but we cannot survive for a long time without breathing. But pranavayu also gives us an interesting idea beyond respiration, because it is associated with what we take in. We take in thoughts, information, sounds, conversations, impressions, experiences. So it invites us to think about everything we are receiving and how it affects us. Apanavayu is the second movement. Apana moves downward and outwards. It supports elimination and release, passing urine and stool, menstruation, childbirth, and ejaculation. And this is where something that sounds very abstract starts becoming quite physical. That downward movement can become too. We might experience that with diarrhea, for example, or it can become insufficient, very weak. And we might experience that with constipation. And yoga postures, asana, give us ways of working with that movement. You might know Apanasana, where you're lying on the back and you draw your knees towards the chest. The clue is actually in the name, Apanasana. It balances the downward flow, Apanavayu. Deep squats, such as Malasana, can encourage downward movement. Other times, an inversion or supported posture, such as legs up the wall, with the pelvis elevated, can help to slow down the downward flow. Suddenly, Apanavayu is something we can begin to recognize through our body. Samanavayu is the third one. Samana is centered around the navel and moves in circular direction. So prana brings the food into the body, and samana helps us to digest and assimilate it, because eating something isn't enough. The body has to break down the food, absorb what it needs, and transform it into something it can actually use. If you have listened to my episode on Manipura chakra, you might already be making a connection here. Manipura is also associated with the navel, digestion, and transformation. This is where it starts to connect. Then there is Vyana Vayu. Vyana is the all-pervasive movement of prana. It distributes energy throughout the body and is associated with circulation and movement from the center towards the periphery. This is one I experience regularly when I'm teaching for long hours during workshops or yoga teacher training, for example. At some point, my head feels really hot while the rest of my body, especially my hands and feet, is cold. It feels as if the energy got stuck in my head. Then I practice some large standing movements, perhaps triangle pose or the side angle, or do a supine lying down twist. And gradually, my hands and feet become warmer. The energy feels more evenly distributed. So I haven't simply gone from cold to warm. I can understand that experience in another way. Something has shifted in how energy is moving through my body. And the last one, Udana. Udana moves upwards. It's particularly associated with the throat, speech, and expression. Practices involving sound and chanting can work strongly with that upward movement. Udana is also associated with uplifting or spiritual energy and with our movement towards greater awareness. And again, perhaps you're already making another chakra connection. Vishuddha, the throat chakra, is associated with communication, expression, and purification. Where are we on our map? One prana, 5 different jobs in the body. That's all I want you to remember for now. The Nadis, the road network. Now, when I first started learning about yoga anatomy and the subtle body, this was one of the biggest mysteries for me. If prana moves around the body, how? How does it get from one place to another? And that brings us to the nadis. Nadis are subtle channels through which prana is understood to flow. You can think of them as an enormous network of roads, allowing prana to reach every little corner of us. And within that humongous road network, 3 roads are particularly important. They are like motorways. Ida Nadi is associated with lunar cooling and calming energy. Pingala Nadi is associated with solar activating and vital energy. And Shushumna Nadi is the central channel associated with balance and spiritual awakening. Ida and Pingala are described as moving upwards, crossing at the different chakra centers. Shushumna moves through the center. If you listened to my episodes on Vishuddha and Ajna Chakra, you may remember that Ida and Pingala meet at Ajna Chakra, the eyebrow center. These nadis are also relevant when we practice Nadi Shodhan, the alternate nostril practice. Sometimes the nadis are compared with our nervous system, and that can be useful, and that can be a useful way of imagining a communication network running through us. But the traditional teachings aren't describing physical nerves. You can't dissect a body and find a nadi. They belong to another layer of yogic understanding. So let's check our map again. 1 prana, 5 jobs to do, 1 humongous road network to get from A to B. There we are. Now we're going to add another piece. The 5 layers of experience, the koshas, give us another way of understanding ourselves. The idea goes back to the Upanishads. ancient philosophical texts that form part of the foundations of yoga philosophy. The Taittiriya Upanishad describes 5 koshas, usually translated as sheaths. I find it easier to think of them as layers through which we experience ourselves and life. The first is Annamaya kosha. Anna means food. This is our physical body, our body made from the food that we eat. It's the body we can see, touch, and measure. It needs food, sleep, movement, physical care. This is probably the layer we are most accustomed to thinking about. Then comes Pranamaya kosha. And there's our familiar word again, prana. This is the energetic layer. Here we find prana, the nadis, the chakras, and although we can't see a nadi like we can see a bone or a muscle, we experience aspects of our energy all the time. We notice our breath, or, as mentioned before, we feel warm or cold. We feel energetic or depleted. So that's another layer of our experience. Then we have Manomaya kosha. This is associated with the mind, our thoughts and our emotions. We think, we worry, we remember, we react, we feel sadness, anger, excitement, fear, and love. And of course, these layers influence each other. If you've ever lost appetite because you're worried or felt your heart racing before a difficult conversation, you've experienced that directly. Then we come to the Vijnanamaya kosha. This is the layer of discernment, a deeper understanding. I don't think of it this simply as intellectual intelligence. It's our ability to step back and see more clearly, to recognize patterns, relationships, consequences, to begin recognizing what supports us, what doesn't, and what response is appropriate. And again, we can see a connection with Ajna Chakra and its association with discernment. And finally, Anandamaya kosha, often described as the blissful body. Here we move towards an experience of joy, of contentment, and connection that doesn't depend entirely upon everything around us is being exactly as we'd like it to be. There's a resonance with Sahasrara Chakra, the crown center, and a movement beyond our usual individual boundaries. Okay, check. 1 prana, 5 jobs, a humongous road network, and 5 layers of experience. That's enough. You might ask, why do these koshas matter? Now, we can bring this back to something very ordinary. Every yoga session I teach begins with checking in. How does your body feel? How is your breath flowing? What is the quality of your thinking today? We are basically checking in with the different koshas. We are moving beyond I feel good, bad, tired, or stressed, and becoming more specific about what we are experiencing. Remember our tiredness example from the beginning. You come to the end of the day exhausted. You lie down and your mind simply carries on. The koshas, it gives us more places to look. Is my physical body tired? Is my energy depleted or stagnant? Is my mind overloaded? Am I carrying an emotion that needs some space? Once recognized which layer needs attention, we have more choices in how to respond. Perhaps the body needs rest. Perhaps the mind needs a completely different activity. Maybe energy needs movement or a fuller breath. Perhaps we need quiet, a conversation, or simply enough space to acknowledge an emotion. The koshas give us a more detailed map of our experience, and that can change how we respond. Now, we arrive at something you may already be much more familiar with, the chakras. The chakras belong within this wider understanding of the subtle body. The Sanskrit word chakra means wheel or circle. They're described as centers within the subtle body, the pranamaya kosha, which prana moves and where important nadis meet. And this is what I find it limiting when chakras are presented simply as 7 colored circles running up the spine. They belong to a much richer system. They connect with prana, they connect with the nadis, and they connect with different aspects of our physical, energetic, emotional, and mental experience or layers. If you have been listening to the recent chakra episodes, we have traveled through this progression together. We began with Muladhara, our foundations, physical existence, sense of safety and stability. Then Svatisthana and our emotional worlds, relationships, pleasure, envy, greed, and our ability to move with change. Manipura brought us to digestion, transformation, vitality, and action. At Anahata, we explored love, compassion, and connection. Then we moved to the higher chakras, Vishuddha, and communication and expression, Ajna and discernment and inner awareness. And finally, Sahasrara, taking us towards connection and an experience beyond our individual sense of self. And that progression is important. The chakras can also be understood as a map of development as human beings. We move from our most fundamental needs for physical existence and safety through emotions, relationships, action, love and expression, and discernment towards greater awareness. A quick word on the history here. Yoga history is rarely straightforward. From my research over the years, there isn't one simple linear story where somebody created our familiar 7-chakra system and everybody practiced it in exactly the same way from then onwards. Different traditions developed and worked with the subtle body systems in different ways. There are different numbers of chakras. So I find it useful to keep some openness around this. In this podcast series and in my teaching, I'm working with the familiar 7-chakra model. And now we can add another part to our map. 1 prana, 5 jobs, 1 humongous road network, 5 layers of experience, 7 energy hubs. We are nearly there. There's one final concept, Kundalini. Within these teachings, Kundalini Shakti is traditionally described as a dormant yet immensely powerful energy resting at Muladhara chakra. As it awakens, it rises through Sushumna Nadi, our central channel, and through the chakras towards Sahasrara. Kundalini is a vast subject on its own. So for today, what matters is that this helps us see why the chakras aren't traditionally understood as 7 separate switches that we can individually turn on and off. They are part of a system concerned with prana, consciousness, and our development as human beings. And that changes how I think about phrases such as balancing your chakras. It becomes an invitation to pay closer attention to ourselves and the whole system. So our complete map. 1 prana, 5 jobs, a humongous road network, 5 layers of experience, 7 energy hubs, and 1 high voltage current traveling along the central channel. There we are. We made it. And now I want to return to where we started. Because for me, this is where yoga philosophy and yoga practice complement each other so beautifully. Yoga teaches us to pay attention. Through asana, we become more familiar with how our body feels. Through pranayama, we begin to notice the energy and how quickly our breath can influence it. Through meditation, we become more familiar with the quality and movement of our mind. Over time, we recognize these signals sooner. Maybe you realize that your body needs rest while your mind needs movement, or vice versa. Maybe you notice that you feel ungrounded before it becomes lead overwhelm. Perhaps you recognize that your energy has dropped because you haven't eaten. You recognize that something needs expressing, or you realize that you already know the answer and need to trust your own discernment. The philosophy gives us a map. The practices teach us how to read it. Together, they help us understand what's happening within us sooner and respond with greater confidence. And for me, that's where these ancient teachings become deeply practical. One last thought before we finish. I want to leave you with this. That was quite a lot to take in. It took me years to understand these concepts, how they relate to each other, and why they might be relevant. I've gone back, same books and teachings many times, and each time another piece made more sense. So if tomorrow all you remember from this episode is there's something called a vayu, that's enough. Maybe 6 months from now, somebody mentions Jnana Vayu and you think, hold on, I've heard that before. And perhaps you come back to this episode. The second time, you'll hear something you missed the first time. That's how I've learned much of this too. You don't need to take it all in at once because you can't. And if you, like the map in front of you, rather than trying to hold my humongous road network in your head, I've written a full accompanying article with everything we talked about today. I link that in the show notes. And there's one more kind of map I want to mention. Back to Balance is my 12-week roadmap for everyday life. There we move from understanding these ideas to paying close attention to your energy, digestion, sleep, food, and daily rhythm. We work out what supports you and build practical anchors around the life you actually live. So you become better at recognizing what you need and finding your way back when life knocks you out of rhythm. Doors open again in September. Find the details and join the interest list through the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to Rooted in the Seasons. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe or follow Rooted in the Seasons on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That way, new episodes land automatically for you. If you like more support in between episodes, you can download my free guide, 5 Daily Ayurvedic Shifts to Feel Like Yourself Again, and join my Sunday Read newsletter. You'll find also these links in the show notes. And if something in today's episode resonated, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Substack or drop me an email. I always read and answer them. Until next time, stay rooted in the seasons. Bye-bye.